Thank you so much, Lewis. So week 2, and we're going to be thinking about home and about belonging today. So I think our hearts are looking for a place of unconditional belonging. We all want a place that we can call home, a place where we don't feel anxious, but we feel at peace, somewhere where we don't have to act or pretend, but can just be our true selves. We're all looking to be part of somewhere where we can be a little bit weird and still be understood. How many people here know that they're just a little bit strange? Yep, cool. Me, definitely. And I'm okay with that. It would be great if every church was exactly like those things, where we couldn't feel anxious, didn't have to pretend, where we could all just be our weird selves. That's not the case. Not every church is that place. It would be great if this church could be exactly like that. This church is great, but we're not perfect. We've still got a lot to learn in terms of accepting people, understanding people's stories. Jesus said about himself, he said, "The Son of Man has no place to lay his head." He had no permanent address, to set up a bank account with or get a phone number from in our world. Thinking about home, maybe home for you has been a happy place. Maybe home for you has been a place of disappointment. Maybe home has been a place of immense pain and sadness. Or maybe for a lot of us, actually, it's kind of this mix of a lot of those different things. But the best stories that we have, I think, the best stories that we can tell one another are stories about what it means to connect with our hearts. The stories about what it means to be truly human, to be alive. And some of the best stories we have are consumed with this idea of searching for home, searching for peace, a place where we can be ourselves, a place where we can be a bit weird and understood, like one in every few movies. That's really the theme. I was thinking about The Lion King. I don't know if we've got any more examples. 8 centuries before Jesus showed up, there was an epic poem called the Odyssey. It caught the imagination of the world. It was about a king's 10-year journey, adventure, to eventually get home after a war. And the themes were about wandering, about returning home, about overcoming the obstacles that we have to find peace. And this story caught the imagination of the world for centuries to come. It's still very, very famous. And so they had their incredible epic Greek poetry. And when I was growing up in the early 90s, we had something similar. It was called, can we get the slide, please? Holding my pose. Next slide, thanks, Callum. It was called Searching. There we go. We're all searching for a place of peace this morning. It was called Homeward Bound, okay? It was an epic journey about 2 dogs and a cat who could speak, amazingly, making their way through the Rocky Mountains, trying to get home to their owners, trying to find that place of peace. So the ancient Greeks had the Odyssey, and we have got Homeward Bound, okay? So you ever feel like we're really regressing in society? In the Bible, we've got the creation story with Adam and Eve, who were banished from their home after their very obvious rebellion. And then throughout the Old Testament, if you've read the stories in the Old Testament, story after story of the people of God who are searching for somewhere to call their own, searching for somewhere that they can call home, a place of peace, of belonging, a place without anxiety and fighting. When Jesus told this story that Lewis has just read to us about home, he would have had everyone's attention. Remember that Jesus and his fellow Israelites were an occupied people. So the land that they called home wasn't really home. It's like being, maybe you live in a rental property and you can do certain things, but you can't do a lot of things. You have to get permission for certain things. You can't do other things. It didn't feel like truly home. But Jesus' story isn't about bricks and mortar. It isn't about new kitchens. It isn't about surging house prices. People often spend their whole lives, Christians included, trying to build the perfect physical home. I'm sure some of us are into grand designs, that type of thing. I occasionally watch it, and it's very watchable, very good. But that's not what we're called to focus on as we live our lives as Christians, particularly. Physical home is important. You want that to be a safe place. But what's more important is finding our home in the love of God. That might be cheesy, but it's very, very true. If you ask the question of yourself, where does your heart go to find rest? Where do you go when you're experiencing stress? Is it a football stadium just to let go and just to pretend like everything's fine? Is it a coffee shop? Is it, the Hearts fans are saying, nope. That's not where I go to de-stress. That's where I go to get stressed. Is it IKEA? Probably not either. Maybe the question isn't where do you go? The question is, who do you go to? Which friends, which family members? I guess the message of this prodigal son story is that we can find that peace that we're searching for with our Father God. No matter how far away we've run, even if you've been at rock bottom, even if you've been disowned by everybody else in your entire life, even if you've done stuff that you are too ashamed to even acknowledge, to yourself, to others, there is no limit to God's amazing grace. And that is the message of this story, and that's the message of the gospel, and we will keep telling that story again and again and again in this church. You know, we can be sleeping on the streets and still be safe and at peace in the Father's house. Ideally, we're not sleeping on the street, but we can be. We can have all the physical comforts in the whole world, the nicest place, all the mod cons. We can have everyone jealous of where we live, but we can still be stuck in that distant country, miles away from the Father's house. Because the point of home is trying to find a place, not just where you can be comfortable, but where you can be in perfect connection with the Father. Where you don't have to strive any longer or pretend any longer. I started off just by saying we are all looking for somewhere to belong, okay? A group of people, we'd love to find a group of people that we can attach ourselves to, people that get us. And I guess that's a lot of what life is about, isn't it? We find that group, oh, they really get us. Okay, yeah, maybe not. We'll find a different group. They really get us. That's our group. We'll stick with them to the end. Okay, maybe not. And when Jesus talks about the lost son returning home, this isn't just about people that stopped coming to church, going back to church on a Sunday morning. You know, it would be amazing if our community and other churches were places that we could accept people without any judgment. That should be the church. That should be what we're known for, but that isn't always the case. This is about more than just churches. The message of Jesus to the disciples before he left was, you can belong in the Father's house and know peace, whatever you are going through, whatever you are walking through, because I'm sending my Holy Spirit to be with you. And this is about finding our resting place in a place of prayer. This is about finding our soul satisfaction, not in moments of fleeting pleasure like the lost son in this story, but in God our Father. Augustine, who's one of the church fathers, said, our hearts will be restless, just flying from one place to the other, from one thing to the next, until they truly find their rest in you, O God. And that's a prayer that he prayed, almost 2 millennia ago. And it's just one of the truest prayers that still recognizes our humanity. But there is an obvious question, okay, that comes with this passage, which is if it's so amazing in the Father's house, if we feel so loved there and so at home, well then why did the prodigal leave? Why did he step out of that place of safety? And why do any of us leave? It says, verse 13, that the younger son got together everything he had, not just a few things. He definitely wasn't coming back anytime soon. And he set off for a far distant country, and it was there that he squandered his wealth in wild living. Why do we wonder? After Jesus was baptized by his cousin John, he was sent into the wilderness, which is kind of like his own distant country. It talks about the prodigal son going to a distant country, where we are told that Jesus was confronted by Satan. Some people might call Satan another name for the devil. And Satan there in the desert with Jesus offered Jesus global fame. He offered to satisfy his immediate physical needs, his hunger, and he offered him everything that he could ever want. And Jesus wasn't having any of it. Thank goodness. Because he was connected to his Father. Okay? He knew who he was, he knew whose he was, he knew where he belonged, and he had that safety and security that he could operate from. But we're not always quite as connected as that, are we? Our foundation isn't always quite as firm as that of Jesus. And so the same voices of the enemy, of Satan, of the devil, will come at us, not just one time, but all the time. And those same voices are met with different responses as we answer, because we do succumb to temptation. We do get stuck in comparison. We do engage in rebellion from God. And we do go after selfish ambition. And when we say yes to those questions and those offers from the enemy, it leaves us at rock bottom. And it leaves us as a slave to those things. And our lives are filled with different voices as we sung. Wasn't that lovely, by the way, having those young people up at the front today? Absolutely brilliant. Dream come true. My plan of the step worked perfectly. And all our lives are filled with different voices. And these voices question our belonging in the Father's house. Just like that voice of the serpent in Genesis said, did God really say that you mustn't eat from that tree? These voices that we're met with every day say, it's time that you proved yourself. You haven't proved yourself to anybody. It's time you did. Or even when we're children say, are you top of the class yet? If not, why not? When's it going to happen? Voices say to us, who do you know that's useful? Are you connected to all the right people yet? If not, why not? Voices that say, how much money do you have? Show me. And they say, oh, you don't have much money. Okay, well, can you make us laugh then instead? Those are the voices that we have to combat. Those are the voices that we're met with every day. And these are the questions that the Father does not ask of us. He doesn't ask us to prove ourselves. He doesn't ask us how much money is in our bank account. He doesn't ask us who we're connected to or how fast we are growing in certain aspects of our careers or whatever. The voice of the Father is gentle. It doesn't coerce us into staying with him in his house. It isn't overbearing. It isn't controlling. It doesn't mock. But sometimes it's so gentle that we choose to listen to the louder voices. These other voices cut in and we forget to listen out for the voice of the Father. And every time we prioritize those other voices, we are led away and we are kind of inched away from home towards the distant country until maybe one day we kind of can't even see where we started. Or for maybe some of you think, well, I don't think I ever have been to the Father's house. I certainly didn't start there. That doesn't describe my childhood or where I was born. There's still an invitation for everybody. So we leave the Father's house because we're searching for belonging. Even though unconditional belonging outside of the Father's house, I think as Christians, we say that that's impossible. There's nothing quite like the Father's love that forgives us for what we've done, meets us where we are, and speaks into who we've been made to be. So outside of the Father's house, we might feel like we have unconditional belonging, but we are only one bad opinion or one wrong word or one financial crisis away from being removed from whatever group it is we think will be there forever, as the youngest son found out, as he was kicked out of those social circles that he bought his way into. We've been promised unconditional belonging even by advertising companies, by the people that make our trainers, by the social groups that we're part of. And I found that they're actually incapable of delivering what they've promised. How can they offer us unconditional belonging when they've never even met our Heavenly Father? If they don't know the Father's love for themselves, how can they offer it? So we leave the Father's house because we're searching for belonging, and we also, let's just say what we kind of all know, but we don't talk about enough, is that we just choose to rebel sometimes as well. Sometimes we want to reject God. It's called our sinful nature. It's where we put our own desires above everything. It's where we think that we know better for ourselves. or we choose what will satisfy us in that moment, even when it harms others, even when it brings others into peril. We choose that. We've all done that. We all do that to different degrees in different ways. And so when Jesus told this to the people who were listening, it would have 100% shocked people. The younger son said, essentially, to his father, "You're dead to me. I want my inheritance right now." This is a public, outright, complete rejection of his dad. And this must have really hurt his father. I don't know if any of you watched Paul McCartney last night. Anybody watched that on the BBC? Some of you. Did you enjoy it? Anybody watched the whole 2.5 hours? I watched the first few songs. I was like, yeah, it's cool, but he's 80 and he's making me feel quite tired. And so I went to sleep. Very, very impressive, you know. I don't think I'll be leading worship at 80. If I am, please stop me. I was reminded, I used to be a big Beatles fan. Once I went on a kind of mission trip to Russia and bought this illegal CD that had every single Beatles song on it ever when I was about 18, and just listened to it for 40 days. And I'm quite an expert in Beatles tracks. And there was this song that I was reminded to, by the Beatles, that I was reminded of as just preparing for this talk. And it's called "She's Leaving Home." Does anybody know it? Sgt. Pepper, Lonely Hearts Club? Some of you? Yep. Thank you, Louise, for nodding enthusiastically. And it's all about the feeling of the pain of rejection of somebody that you've nurtured, poured life, love into, deciding to leave. So, I don't know, in tribute to Paul McCartney, I'm going to sing you a verse. Up for that? Okay, get the key right. Father snores as his wife gets into her dressing gown, picks up the letter that's lying there, standing alone at the top of the stairs. She breaks down and cries to her husband, "Daddy, our baby's gone. Why would she treat us so thoughtlessly? How could she do this to me?" And it goes, we never thought of ourselves, is leaving, never a thought for ourselves. Home, we struggled hard all our lives to get by. She's leaving home after living at home for so many years. Not saying that was the best rendition that you've ever heard. But there's something about hearing basically the same story put into different words, isn't there? That you just wake up one day and the sun has gone. Everything that you've poured in, everything that you've built in to that relationship is just meant nothing to them. They've gone. They left a note. And I don't know your story, whether you connect more with the story of that elder brother that we're looking at next week, working the field in bitterness, or the younger son who disappeared and just went hard in a life of partying. But there's pain at every stage of life that we spend outside of the Father's love. All of us have rejected the Father's love at one point, whether subtly or in really obvious ways. We've sought belonging and love in places that are only really imitations of the real thing. And astonishingly, with God, there is always an invitation home. That just is incredible. Even to those who've disowned God, even to those who said, "God is dead to me." And it's not just a backdoor welcome or side door welcome, it's the full works, you know. It's the ring, it's the robe, it's the sandals, and it's the feast. And he hired a band to come and put on a party, despite this leaving home, despite "you're dead to me," despite "I'm going to take your inheritance and make sure there's not any of it left within weeks." And the forgiveness that the Father shows is astonishing. The Son won't have to work as a slave, as a servant, or as a hired hand because he's been redeemed. And the pain that the Son caused is real. Our sin is real. search for belonging in other places. Our rejection, our rebellion is real, and it has caused the Father pain, but the determined love of the Father is stronger. And I'm so grateful to God for that that's true in my life. God knows how far we've wandered. Some of you know that hymn, prone to wander, God, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love, but here's my heart, God, take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. God knows how much of it has been curiosity that we've left Father's house. Sometimes it's been other people's fault and they've dragged us out. Sometimes it's just been our own plain sinfulness. But none of that changes the welcome that we receive. The exile is over. The cross has shown us beyond doubt that the Father always runs towards us. So I'm coming towards our last point. And Luke 15, we didn't read verse 1 there. Lewis just started from verse 11. But the reason Jesus decided to tell these stories at this time is because he was under attack. I mean, he was under attack for most of his ministry. But at the beginning of this chapter, it says, now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus. They're having a lovely time, I'm sure. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered under their breath, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So he was being attacked. They were saying, there's no way that this guy Jesus can be a prophet of God if he hangs out with tax collectors and sinners, game, set, and match. Whatever healing he's done, it just can't happen. He can't be from God. They hated the company that he kept. And Jesus, on the other side, had no time for their religious snobbery. And so basically, to make a point, he told them this story to show them what God is actually like. And he told it in the company of the tax collectors and sinners, almost just to prove his point. Jesus practiced what he preached, and he said, these are my people, these prodigals who are maybe returning or have returned, these are my children. And even when we leave the Father's house and reject the loving voice of God, he is at home with us. He's not scared of meeting us where we are. Remember the lost sheep? God is desperately searching for us. Remember the lost coin? God is rejoicing when lost people are found. There's rejoicing in heaven. There's a party in heaven. And the lost son, a story of rebellion met with radical hospitality. This is what God is actually like. This is good news. He prefers to hang out with sinners who've come to their senses along the way than he does with just judgmental onlookers who think they don't need any help from God whatsoever. And all it took for the younger son to be welcomed back was an empty stomach, because God's grace does all the work. And you might think, Thomas, but this story is different, because the father just waits for the son to come back. He doesn't really do much. But no, it just gives us another angle, really, because the Father loves us enough to make our own mistakes without coming chasing after us straight away. He gives us the choice to leave, the choice to stay away, and also the choice to return home where we belong. We also mustn't mustn't forget, somebody pointed this out to me recently, that when the Father embraces the Son, when he runs down that track and gives him a hug and kisses him, that the Son is almost certainly still covered in pig poo. He's not had a chance to get clean. He's not had a chance to present himself. Let's try that. He's not had a chance to kind of brush himself down. Most of us dress up when we want to be accepted by certain people, don't we? We put on our glad rags when we want to make a good impression. But the Father meets the Son where he was covered in filth. Don't tell me that the Father is not committed to the Son. God meets us where we are, even when we're covered in shame and filth, and even when we barely started our recovery. God meets us. And it costs the Father everything to embrace the Son in the way that he did. If you think about his reputation, if you think about just how humbling it was for the Father to run, but it was worth it. It says just in the final verse of this passage, we had to celebrate and be glad. He says to the older brother, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. he was lost and is found.